this video, I'm going to be discussing a rather complex subject, which is the creation of the universe. But in order to understand the creation of the universe, we have certain concepts we have to essentially learn before I can get to that explanation of how everything just kind of materialized in that way. But if we wish to understand it, we have to involve a couple different subjects in order to understand essentially the formulation or the recipe. Well, for one, we can say we live in a three-dimensional universe. 3 dimensions. What are those 3 dimensions? Well, we can say spirit, mind, and body. Those are 3 dimensions we know to our existence as humans. But now let's look at the aspects of it through a biblical tale. What are the 3 kings that are there? What are the 3 kings that are there for the son to be greeted at his birth? Now let's look at it from a perspective of science. What are 3 molecules that you need for life? Water, H2O. And now when we get to the water point of things, you start to see that it's confined to a formless self, you could say. Now you need to put a glass to it so that it has a shape, so that it can take on a shape and give life. But now let's look at things from a different perspective, such as magnetism or energy. When you look at a concept such as magnetism, which is the essential process for an electrical current to be established, you need 2 opposite poles. You need a negative and a positive, and the positive is constantly pushing the negative. Okay, what does that have to do with anything now? Well, when it comes to gravity as an example, gravity works on this axis, the y-axis. And it functions by pushing this energy down, which then, once it reaches a grounding force, that energy has nowhere to go but to come back up. And now we have life. Life that now, when you look at any particular thing in life, you need to realize one particular concept. There is different levels of consciousness around you, different levels of energy, not just in humans, in animals, plant forms, rocks, earth. All of these things are a condensed energy, which has caused a materialization within this universe. But in the purpose of magnetism, if we can understand that there's different levels of electrical currents, also known as the frequency or the ohm, the resonance at which that current is firing. So now when you look at the way that this current is firing, well, it has to come from somewhere. In order to be firing down and then push back up in a body. But now let's think of magnetism, for example, or the different levels of energy currents you can have. Now let's look at it from the perspective of the levels of consciousness that exist. And for this, I'm going to use a particular concept around the chakras. Notice how we have 7 chakras in our bodies. I can't name them all off the top of my head right off the bat, but these chakras are energetic points throughout the body, right? Which is like a breathing process of energy. We have air lungs, and then we have energetic lungs. And these energetic lungs are kind of where we absorb energy from. It causes a pull. And in order for this pull, there has to be a stimulus to one of these senses. Which then creates an evolutionary state. Because if you can stimulate a sense, you then create an evolution. In order to understand this process of evolution, let's look at the evolution of consciousness through different wildlife. Some of the most intelligent life forms are only at an animalistic intelligence, which some of we as humans also obey the animalistic consciousness. But you can also look at plant life as a conscious network. You can look at humans as a conscious network. And so let's look back now into the number 7. 7 chakras, which means that there are actually 7 senses. I'm not going to explain every single sense. I'll leave those up to you to discover your mind and your dreams. But it's basically a pole. God pushes down and you push back up. I don't know if you're quite understanding the perspective I'm trying to point at, but from this energetic field up in the sky that is pointing down for you to materialize, you now have your chakras, your energetic lungs, which you're absorbing this energy, and it is bouncing off of this grounded field. And through this bounded field, now this energy, as above, so below, as below, so above. The last two senses we have as humans are our mind and then you get to the sense above, which is the dream. What do you think that essentially does as a pattern? Imagine now if in the sky, God is above in the opposite direction of those chakras, but upside down. And that energy is being pushed down in a dreamlike world. And then you basically get to the current grounding on the opposite side here. And when you look at this perspective now, you begin to see that from life to dream to life to dream to life to dream. From being the dreamed to being the dreamer, and from being the dreamer to being the dreamed. Now let's analyze the concepts of the actual formulation of the universe. And I'm going to do this by analyzing the exact process at which you develop a video game. Because matter generates in the exact same way. I would encourage some of you to look now and Google or search on YouTube a quick video. How is a video game created? And you will see that it starts with a flat axis and a y-axis, a y and x-axis. That gives you height, gives you width, but now you need something to give a depth. And how do you do that? Well, if you want to give something depth, you need to give it time. Because time passing all of a sudden creates this process where you can actually move from. And so in the 7 days, now look at the point of a cell, such as let's say a brand new fertilized cell. How do its cells divide? And how does a process of a computer game being generated divide? As above, so below, as below, so above. Then you have your base. Now you have a steady pace of ground, a standing universe, with one pole in the sky, a polar opposite, and another polar opposite on the ground. And that can go the opposite way as well if you wish. And this is where it gets interesting, because now as I start talking about the levels of consciousness, this is where I'm going to introduce the concepts of heaven and hell to you, which is a continuation of this energy pushing further past up into the next, or the energy that pushes down further below, where then you fall. Now let's imagine this concept for a second. When you look at energy, energy or the universe is constantly expanding. But it's like a breathing process. Expansion, and for every action is an opposite and equal reaction. And energy works in the same way. It expands and contracts. It expands and contracts. And in this expansion of energy is where you get to see the different levels of consciousness, essentially. Which, let's use the number 7 once again and say that there are 7 levels of consciousness. Just in our human experience. If you're interested in finding out a great teaching, I suggest you read the great book known as the Kybalion. You may understand this levels of consciousness a little bit more thoroughly from this point. But in the levels of consciousness talks about going from organic, or let's say chemical to organic, to then lower life form, lower intelligence life form, to higher intelligence life form, and on and on and on. Then you enter the higher intelligence life form, and in the higher intelligent life form is once again 7 levels, and it's like a Russian Nightingale, you could say, where this pattern, as above so below, and as below so above, creates this materialization, this self. And you are the reflection of the Creator, which you are made in the image of. But what does it mean to be the reflection? Well, for one, you could say you could be a spitting image. Or a reflection is where you reflect back. And in that saying, now let's analyze the 7 levels of consciousness once again, and let's look at the next process known as entering heaven and hell. Imagine in your life, at some point you will die. But what happens the moment you die? Well, the most comforting thought is the idea of if you've been a good person, you go to heaven, and if you've been a bad person, you go to hell. But now what if I'm going to introduce a second concept, which is according to how much you've advanced in your life as an individual, how much you've evolved, do you break through? Do you break through the firmament as a light, where now you are given a chance to be given a question? Do you choose to go back down to be with your friends? Or do you choose to go up to the next evolutionary stage? Do you see what I'm saying? Because at this point now you can see that for every step is another step and another step and another step and another step. And it never ends that way. And it never ends that way. The only thing that starts is which direction you choose to go from. So I suggest you make your wise decision when you choose to level up.